Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Geraghty.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have all good martinis for conservatives to close out the work week. Good, good, and good. But sadly, we do need to start on a somber note before we get to the martinis. And Jim, this comes as no surprise, but nonetheless, we've been dreading it for some time. John McCain has decided to discontinue treatment for his brain cancer. His family issued a statement Friday morning saying, in the year since, John has surpassed expectations for his survival, but the progress of disease and the inexorable advance of age render their verdict. With his usual strength of will, he has now chosen to discontinue medical treatment. Our family is immensely grateful for the support and kindness of all his caregivers over the last year and for the continuing outpouring of concern and affection from John's many friends and associates and the many thousands of people who are keeping him in their prayers. God bless and thank you all. Jim, we know from diagnosis of this glioblastoma in the past that the inevitable will come at some point here, and that'll probably be sooner rather than later with him discontinuing treatment. There will be plenty said whenever that time comes, but it's a very difficult time for the McCain family, and whatever you think of anyone's politics at a time like this, it's best to keep praying for the family.
Indeed, Greg. It's I don't know whether you think of the silver lining to this is that to the extent Senator McCain is able to see all of the coverage, you see this outpouring of appreciation of his many years of service to the country, inside, in uniform and out of uniform, in the Senate. You and I would not lie and say we've never disagreed with the man. In fact, there are times we've disagreed with the man very strongly. As I put, he can be he could be extremely infuriating as often as he could be extremely inspiring. And yet, this was a guy who did what he thought was right, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the rest of the party. He followed his true north wherever it would lead him and did not fear the consequences. And it's been kind of depressing to see since the announcement was made a little bit earlier. The number of folks on social media who feel the need to say, I don't like that. He voted against the Obamacare repeal. It's like, I don't know if we need to think about that at a time like this. There will be plenty of time in the future to assess the totality of John McCain's record. But for now, a family that dreaded this day, has to now acknowledge that it has arrived. And it is going to be a tough time for the McCain family for some time to come. I think the only other thing is also to think about, if you face a disease as terrible as this, to face it the way McCain has, with this courage and determination and, a noble ending to a very, very full American life.
Let's move on to our good martinis now. Jim, this one wouldn't normally make us too happy, but when you think of it in the context of the midterm elections and what might actually sway people's votes or get them to the polls at all, this is good. Nancy Pelosi is making it very clear she has no intention of going anywhere. This is your lead item in the Morning Jolt today. She was asked by the Associated Press about 57 House Democratic incumbents and challengers who are pledging to support someone else. And she says that's mere politics. Here's some of her quotes. "This is not anything to make a big fuss over. It's politics," she said in a 35-minute conversation with the AP. "I can take the heat, and that's why I stay in the kitchen." Pushing back on those who say her leadership position is in jeopardy, Pelosi all but dared her doubters to envision any other House Democrats sitting across the table to negotiate with Trump. Quote, "I have a following in the country that's unsurpassed by anybody, unless they're running for president," she said. "Trump and the Republicans are eager to see her go," she said, "and I'm just not going to let them do that." Jim, she's a little used to us while she's actually on the job, but we don't want to see her go. We love the fact that she's promising to press on here because hopefully that'll help us out come November.
Yeah, I want you to imagine a scenario in which tomorrow morning Nancy Pelosi realizes, oh, my goodness, I'm a giant liability to my party. Every House Democrat running for re-election and every House challenger has a tougher time because of me. I'm a terrible communicator. I live on Billionaires Row in San Francisco. I'm a liberal caricature. If I didn't exist, the Republican Party would have to invent me. Greg, where was I going with all this? Anyway, let's just say she recognizes the great political dead weight that she represents for the party. And she decides to to say, you know what, I will not stand for Speaker. It's time for new blood, a new generation. I will be happy to advise the next Speaker and lend my wisdom, yada, 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 but I do not intend to be the next Speaker of the House. What would House Republicans do? Because, they've already cut all the ads saying, a vote for John Smith is a vote for Nancy Pelosi. One of the points I wanted to emphasize in today's Jolt was the fact that it really is. Yes, there are 57 either House incumbents or House challengers who say they don't want to vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. There were 61 House Democrats who voted against Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker in the internal kind of Democratic caucus vote at the beginning of this Congress after the 2016 cycle. So you think about it, 57 is actually lower than 61. There's really no indicator that the number of Democrats and Democratic districts where you cannot run as a supporter of Nancy Pelosi has changed. It's probably about where it would be the same. And so, the other thing is when you push these guys like O'Connor in Ohio, as Chris Matthews did and said, well, look, Nancy Pelosi is going to run for Speaker. If it comes down to your vote for the Republican or for Nancy Pelosi, who are you going to vote for? And O'Connor said Pelosi. Now, that's fine, and that's what I fully expect every Democrat to do. But if you're running around on the campaign trail in 2018 saying we need new blood and both parties need new leadership and indicating that you won't vote for Nancy Pelosi, if your first vote in the House is for Nancy Pelosi, it indicates your promises can't be taken too seriously. So she is a headache for and thank goodness she's not, recognizing this, and thank goodness she's determined to stay there. She's not atop the party because she's a great communicator. She's not there because she's this great strategist. In the end, she is a very good fundraiser, and she knows where all the bodies are buried, and she's been there for a very long time, so a lot of people owe her favors. That's it. That's what keeps her atop the House speakership. And, of course, the fact that there's really no consensus challenger. Tim Ryan, as I said, got 61 votes last time around. Something of a blue dog or centrist one, but I don't know if that's necessarily where the center of gravity is amongst House Democrats. So we'll see how things shake out, but I think it's extremely likely that if the Democrats take the House, Nancy Pelosi will be the next Speaker of the House, and that is probably the most important message for House Republicans in this fall.
You know what else makes this delicious? Because the other people really interested in the job are the same age as her, Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn, who said if Pelosi stands down, Clyburn has said he would be interested in running for Speaker. Clearly, that's not going to happen now. But what makes it delicious is you've got these young radicals like David Hogg down in Florida, who is just furious about how the old people in the Democratic Party won't get out of the way because it's the time of the young people. He throws in a few more F-bombs, obviously. But and it's just the fact that they have this internal fight going on about who's going to end up controlling the party is just delicious.
Yeah, and of course there was some talk. You look at the House leadership. All right, well, who do we have who's not eligible for Social Security? Who in this crew doesn't look like part of the cast of Cocoon? And of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez knocked off that guy. The one lone young guy lost the primary. It's very interesting. It'd be kind of interesting to see. I'll put that on my to-do list, is to look at House Democrats who could plausibly challenge Nancy Pelosi. I think it's worth saying right now, almost nobody is in a position to credibly challenge Nancy Pelosi right now. That could change, but extremely unlikely in the next couple of months. You're going to suddenly see some House Democrat rise as the better option and manage to topple her.
Terrorist strikes again in London.
Putin's nuclear ambitions are raising proliferation questions.
There's a new military strategy in the South China Sea.
Global events happening now mean the demand for national security professionals will spike over the next decade. America's security will depend on individuals highly trained in strategy, disruption management, and decision-making. The Daniel Morgan Graduate School of National Security prepares students for a world full of instability. Students in our state-of-the-art school, just 3 blocks from the White House, take courses in counterterrorism, U.S. nuclear weapons, Russian politics, and statecraft. Our graduates are well prepared for sought-after security positions in government and private sectors. Even more unique are the multi-full-ride scholarships provided by donors investing in future leaders. For more information, go to dmgs.org/radio. For a career in organizations like Marriott and Boeing, the CIA, or FBI, and a possible full-ride scholarship, go immediately to dmgs.org/radio. That's dmgs.org/radio.
All right, Jim, on to our second good martini now. And I think I know someone who could have used a few classes at that graduate school. Reality Winner. Remember her? Kind of a strange name, but she's kind of a poor man's Jim Snowden. This is CNN. A former government contractor accused of leaking confidential information to the media has been sentenced to more than 5 years in prison. 26-year-old Reality Winner was accused of taking a report about a 2016 Russian military intelligence cyber attack from the NSA facility where she worked and sending it to an online news outlet. Winner initially faced 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine, but accepted a plea deal. A federal judge sentenced her to 63 months in prison with 3 years of supervised release. According to her attorney, she's a good person who didn't understand the magnitude of what she was doing. Her family says she's a patriot. So, Jim, we've obviously seen different approaches from our government in people mishandling classified information. That was obviously a big issue in the 2016 campaign, and then other people have paid dearly for it. But the point is that mishandling it is a crime, especially when it's so deliberate and you're trying to expose it to the media and so forth. And so this is an appropriate sentence.
You know, Greg, this is just a jaw-dropping story from beginning to end. But the part I think I want to focus in on is that someone chose to name their daughter Reality Winner. Let's say I remember Charlie Winner, the old athlete. It's having Winner as a name by itself. But if you choose to make your first name Reality, that's a really unusual choice. And then for that person to go into the realm of national security, and then for that person to choose to become a leaker. And then for that person to choose to become a leaker and do so in a way that was fairly easily tracked back to her, it really leaves the indication that this woman was not accurately named. She's not a winner, and her reality is not that, not very encouraging or optimistic right now. You know, Greg, it does raise an interesting issue, though. I've heard from those in the intelligence community who say the people coming in to work for these agencies, CIA, NSA, various parts of the Department of Defense, et cetera, they, millennials, don't, at some point, they have just a very different attitude towards secrecy. And I don't know if this is a matter of not studying history and not understanding the Verona tapes and, the history of espionage and Hansen and Aldrich Ames and all the number of times where, leaking secrets can get someone killed. They do kind of buy into this philosophy put forth by the Julian Assanges of the world to say that, no, information wants to be free. If you don't have secrets, everything will be fine. That's the case, and it kind of strikes me as an unbelievably naive way of looking at the world. Greg, I don't know about you, the second most troubling thing about Reality Winner, besides her name, would be the fact that she was hired. I thought these places were hard to get into. You think they'd filter for this. You'd think they'd ask you, hey, have you ever been tempted to leak something because you think it serves a greater good? Because if the answer is yes, then you shouldn't be working here. You're not entitled to make that decision. We have procedures for these sorts of things. If everybody released everything they thought was serving the greater good, we would have no secrets. But apparently that's too much to ask these days, Greg. But at least she's being held accountable.
Yes, exactly. She was working with the Pluribus International Corporation in Augusta, Georgia, with top secret security clearance when she leaked information for a June 27 article in The Intercept. The quote from the U.S. attorney here, Bobby Christine, is, "This defendant used her position of trust to steal and divulge closely guarded intelligence information. Her betrayal of the United States put at risk sources and methods of intelligence gathering, thereby offering advantage to her adversaries." She should consider herself very fortunate to only have 5 years behind bars. All right, let's move on to our third and final good martini here, Jim. Fantastic way to end the week. And we just talked on Thursday about pretty exciting Senate polls. Rick Scott up 6 in Florida. Leah Vukmir within 2 in Wisconsin. Bob Menendez only up 6, the Democratic senator who's clearly got an ethical cloud in New Jersey and so forth. And now, oddly enough, one state where you wouldn't think there would be much of a red wave, Oregon. Oregon, yes, the governor's race in Oregon is pretty much a dead heat, and the Republican might actually have a real chance here because Kate Brown is the governor there. She has no recent scandals of note, either from her personal life or her administration, according to reports. So who, in the end, is actually going to challenge her in such a left-leaning state?
Bueller.
That's right, Bueller. Washington Times. Oregon Governor Kate Brown positioned herself early on as a leader of the anti-Trump opposition, but the state's never-ending panoply of protest activity has backfired on her re-election bid, with voters suffering from resistance fatigue. Ms. Brown, who was expected to coast to victory in deep blue Oregon, has found herself deadlocked in the latest polls with State Representative Newt Bueller, an affable orthopedic surgeon whose moderate brand of republicanism is attracting crossover voters. On the hot air site, Jazz Shaw says, just how bad is the polling news for the formerly unsinkable Kate Brown? Well, back in January, Oregon Public Broadcasting had her leading Bueller by 17 points, and the race seemed to be all over but the shouting. But as the year wore on, while nobody was paying attention, something began to change. By the middle of July, a Gravis poll had the race in a dead heat. 2 weeks ago, a Clout Research survey actually had Bueller pulling ahead by 1. He says one of her supporters kind of speaks for why there's a big shift here, says his decision not to support her as being because of the appalling sight of ICE protesters tearing down American flags and Antifa attacking people in the streets. And he's not the only one. People who would be generally sympathetic to progressive causes seem to be coming around to more of a not-in-my-backyard attitude as they witness weekly protests turning into brawls, sprawling homeless encampments, and exhausted law enforcement officers trying to keep up with it all. And, oh, by the way, the Washington Times points out that the protests against ICE in Portland lasted for 5 weeks, leaving behind so much trash that the area was ultimately declared a biohazard. So, Jim, resistance fatigue, I can get behind that.
Resistance fatigue might very well be the slogan of the decade, Greg. I had mentioned earlier in the week the 2014 governor's race. I was out there that year, and I remember people saying, look, we have this reputation of being this deep blue state, but we really aren't. As recently as 2002, Republican Gordon Smith had won the Senate race, got reelected. And I'm looking at the county map here, Greg, and it's worth noting Bill Bradbury, the Democratic nominee that year, who, by the way, was the Secretary of State, already won statewide office. This is not some, Irving Schmidlap guy off a bus who was the nominee. Got 40% of the vote, but he got the only county he won was the one with Portland. The rest of the state is all ruby red, and it's kind of fascinating to see that. Now, obviously, look, it's been drifting blue. Obviously, you have a lot more concentrated votes in there than the rest of the state. That's kind of the natural normal thing of dynamic there. But, Republicans thought it was actually not that much of a margin in the 2004 Republican presidential races. You looked into it, and Republicans out there were saying, hey, we think we've got a shot at this. Now, they ended up falling short. But it's also worth noting, particularly if these polls get close, is that the Republican candidate can outperform their polls. There may be a bit of a shy Tory effect somewhere in Oregon. Just looking at the last few polls back in 2014, this is when Kitzhaber was the Democratic governor. Survey USA had him up 10. CBS News had him up 6. Oregonian polls, last poll before the election, had him up 7. He won by 5.1%, 49.8 to 44.7. That's not an absolutely insurmountable margin for a Republican to overcome if they have a good year and the Democrats have a bad year. And I think having lots of protests around is the sort of thing that makes people say, you know what, I've had enough of this. I want somebody to step in and change things around here. So again, don't count your chickens before they're hatched. This is not a ironclad lock prediction or anything like that. But it does seem like the ingredients are there for a much closer race in the Oregon governor's race than Democrats in that state were expecting.
Oh, absolutely. So keep an eye on that. In the end, I'd be a little bit surprised if the Republicans did pull it off, but it'd be fun to have the Democrats have to devote a lot of resources to that. Jim, just as an aside, if there ever was a candidate, regardless of political ideology, named Irving Schmidlap, how hard would it be for you to not support him?
So people have asked me, because that's always stuck in my head as the generic weird, who the heck is this guy name? I want to say this came from Mad Magazine, but I can't find any reference to it online. So maybe at some point I just heard this in my childhood and associated it with Mad Magazine or something like that. But yes, Irving Schmidlap, if you're out there, I'm going to have to support you at some point for whatever you do in life. You've been very good to me.
Oh, fantastic. Jim, have an excellent weekend. We'll talk again on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Geraghty of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Have a great weekend, everyone, and tune in again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.